My name is Elena Rivera, and I thought moving into the old apartment on the edge of town would be the start of a new life. I was wrong. From the moment I stepped inside, the air felt wrong, thick with something I couldn't name. Then came the whispers, the scratches on the floor, and the shadows that didn't belong. I wasn't alone, and whatever was with me wasn't human. I should have left, but the apartment didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to stay. I thought moving into the old apartment on the edge of town would be a fresh start. The rent was cheap, the rooms spacious, and the landlord seemed eager to get rid of it, almost too eager. The building looked harmless enough from the outside, brick walls darkened with age, a small iron gate that squeaked when it moved, and a dim light flickering near the entrance. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt that the air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The apartment smelled faintly of damp wood and something sour, something I couldn't identify. It reminded me of a cellar I'd seen once as a child, hidden beneath a farmhouse. I told myself it was nothing, that old buildings always smelled strange, but the smell wasn't the only thing that made my stomach twist in unease. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than they should have been. They pooled in strange ways, stretching toward me when I wasn't looking directly at them, and sometimes, just out of the corner of my eye, they seemed to move. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was exhaustion from the move. I unpacked boxes slowly, deliberately avoiding the darkened corners, but every time I placed an item down, I felt as though I was being watched. At night, the creaks began. Soft, deliberate, almost human. At first I thought it was just the building settling. Old wood groans, I told myself. But the creaks weren't random, they were rhythmic, pacing across the floor as if someone or something was walking behind me. Always keeping distance, never close enough to see clearly. I started noticing things out of place. A book I had set on the table would be on the chair the next morning. A mug would appear on the windowsill, filled with water I hadn't poured. My own possessions felt unfamiliar, rearranged in ways I hadn't done. At first, I assumed I was forgetful, sleep-deprived from the move, until the marks appeared on the floor, thin scratches, faint but distinct, leading from the door to the bedroom. They were shallow, not deep enough to be dangerous, but deliberate, as if someone had walked there, watching. I froze, staring at them, my heart hammering. I hadn't been near that area. I hadn't touched the floor. Sleep became difficult. I would lie in bed, pulling the covers over my head, trying to block out the sounds, but the apartment was alive in a way I couldn't explain. Whispering began, soft at first, like wind rustling through leaves, brushing my ears with syllables I couldn't understand. I would sit up, heart racing, scanning the room, but there was nothing there. The shadows stretched unnaturally, walls bending just slightly, like the apartment itself was watching me, aware of every move I made. On the second night I saw it. I woke to a cold draft, the kind that seeps through even tightly closed windows. My eyes adjusted slowly, and there, in the corner, a figure, tall, thin, bent in a way that made my stomach churn. It didn't move at first, just stood there watching me with an unnatural patience. I blinked, and it vanished. My pulse raced, and I questioned my sanity. But the scratches on the floor had multiplied, leading now to every corner of the room. They weren't random, they traced the paths I had walked, marking me, tracking me, as if the apartment was mapping my life. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The fear settled into my bones, a cold, constant weight. Every sound was magnified, the drip of water in the kitchen, the soft hum of the radiator, the groan of the walls settling. Every shadow was suspect. Every corner was a potential hiding place. The apartment was not just a building, it was something more, something aware. And it had claimed me from the moment I stepped inside. That night, I dreamt of the scratches again. In my sleep, I saw hands pressing from the floor, clawing at me, whispering the word over and over until I woke, drenched in sweat. I told myself it was just a nightmare, but when I opened my eyes, the marks were there, faint but undeniable. I could feel them under my skin, a pulsing pressure, as if the apartment itself wanted me to see them. By morning, I avoided the corners of the room, avoided the shadows, and avoided looking at the floor altogether. But I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before the apartment revealed itself fully. Something lived here, something patient, and I was already trapped. And in that realization, a chill ran through me as the last thought formed before I even got out of bed. This place wasn't just where I lived. It was waiting, and it wanted me to stay. The days after the first night were worse than I could have imagined. The apartment seemed to grow more alive with every passing hour, as if it was learning me, studying my habits, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I could no longer ignore the shifting shadows. They weren't just in the corners anymore, they crept along the walls, curling around doorframes, pooling under furniture, moving when I wasn't looking. Sometimes I could swear they breathed, expanding and contracting, like lungs made of darkness. Objects began to disappear, then reappear in places I would never have left them. My keys vanished from the counter, only to be found inside the refrigerator. A notebook I had left open on the table turned upside down. The apartment was mocking me, or worse, it was speaking to me through these small, impossible acts. I started avoiding mirrors entirely. The reflections no longer felt safe. Sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of something behind me, a shadow moving with the wrong kind of weight, or a face lingering too long, staring, watching, waiting. The whispering returned at night, louder now, almost insistent. It circled around my bed, brushing against my skin like cold fingers. I could feel a presence leaning over me, though nothing appeared in the room. I tried to convince myself it was stress or imagination, but the pressure of the air, the weight of the darkness pressing down, told me otherwise. I wasn't alone. The apartment had claimed me, and it refused to let go. One evening I noticed a door that hadn't been there before. It was narrow, half hidden behind a bookshelf that had always leaned against the wall. I hadn't remembered it when I moved in, and yet there it was, faintly outlined in the dim light. My stomach twisted as I approached it. When I placed my hand on the cold wood, the air shifted, almost like it exhaled against my palm. Darkness lay beyond, thicker than any night I had known. I wanted to turn away, but my body was drawn forward. Something inside me wanted to see, wanted to understand. I tried to sleep that night, but sleep refused me. Every sound in the apartment seemed louder, sharper. The creaking floors became footsteps, pacing in a rhythm that mimicked mine. The radiator groaned in what I could swear were whispers, forming words just out of comprehension. My own breathing startled me, each inhale and exhale a shout in the oppressive silence. And then I saw it again, the tall figure from before, its head bent at an impossible angle, a silhouette against the darkness of the corner. I froze, unable to blink, unable to breathe. Its gaze pinned me to the bed, and for the first time, I understood that it wasn't just watching. It was measuring, cataloging, marking me. The scratches on the floor had returned, snaking across the apartment like veins. They led from the bedroom door to every other part of the apartment, tracing a path I hadn't taken, yet somehow knew. I followed them, trembling, each step heavier than the last. They ended at the narrow hidden door. The shadows spilled from its edges, black and liquid, reaching for me. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. My curiosity, my fear, my very survival had been manipulated, lured forward by the apartment itself. In the hidden space beyond the door, the air was colder, thick with the scent of sulfur and something rotting. Shapes moved just beyond the corner of my vision. They weren't quite human, and yet they weren't entirely shadows either. I felt a weight in the air, like the room itself was alive, breathing and shifting around me. The whispers grew louder, forming syllables I couldn't understand, a language older than the building itself. I realized then that the apartment didn't just want me inside it, wanted me aware, terrified, conscious. It was feeding on my fear, my hesitation, my hope of escape. I stumbled backward into the main room, gasping. The figure had disappeared, but its presence lingered. My heart was pounding, my palms slick with sweat. The whispers had not ceased, they had followed me, curling around the furniture, echoing in the walls. And when I looked at the floor, my blood ran cold. The scratches weren't random anymore. They spelled words in jagged lines. Stay. I wanted to leave, to run, to throw myself out the door and never look back. But when I reached for the handle, my hands trembled. The air grew heavy, thickening like water. I felt myself pulled inward, against the world outside, as if invisible arms were dragging me back. And in that moment, I understood the terrifying truth. I wasn't just trapped by fear. I was trapped by the apartment itself. No one could hear me. No one could save me. The walls were patient, the shadows cunning, the whispers relentless. And as I sank to the floor, the weight of the apartment pressing down, I realized something I couldn't unhear. It wouldn't let me go. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. Something in the dark corner moved, brushing against the floor in a deliberate, slow shuffle. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there, watching, waiting, and then faintly, the scratches on the floor shifted again, spelling words I could not ignore, chilling me to my core. Stay. Forever. Sleep had become impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the apartment came alive with whispers and movement. I began wandering from room to room, feeling like a ghost in my own home, trying to avoid the corners where shadows pooled thickest. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, as though the building itself were alive. I kept thinking I saw shapes shifting just beyond my vision, figures, hunched and thin, moving too smoothly, too deliberately to be anything natural. I could no longer tell if I was awake or dreaming, if the floor beneath me was solid or something more liquid, more alive. I noticed the doors again, doors that hadn't been there before, narrow, dark and half hidden behind furniture or walls that had always seemed solid. They appeared at odd angles, impossible perspectives. One day I followed one of them, drawn by a curiosity I couldn't resist, and discovered a narrow hallway that hadn't existed yesterday. It twisted in ways that made my stomach lurch, folding back on itself like a ribbon. Mirrors lined its walls, but they didn't reflect me. Instead, I saw a version of myself moving differently, slower, or sometimes faster, doing things I hadn't done yet. My reflection wasn't me. It was something else, something aware. The basement called to me next. I woke one morning on the floor of my bedroom, not remembering how I had gotten there, but certain that my feet had moved me down the stairs while I slept. The furnace room at the end of the basement smelled of sulfur and burnt hair. Shadows wriggled along the walls, stretching like living ink. My footsteps echoed against concrete. Though I had barely moved, something heavy pressed down on my chest, and I felt eyes boring into my back from the darkness. I tried to turn, but my body was frozen in place, as if the apartment itself controlled my movements. I saw it then, a face pressed against the metal of the old furnace. Its eyes were wide, black pits, staring into me with a silent scream. The mouth moved, but no sound emerged. No words escaped. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and in that instant, the staircase I had descended vanished, replaced by a wall of shadow. I was trapped. My mind screamed for escape, but the basement's darkness felt alive, crawling along the walls and ceiling, wrapping around my legs, tugging me closer to the furnace. Something in me, fear, instinct, or perhaps the apartment itself, forced me to flee. I scrambled upward, desperate for the hallway, for anything that resembled normalcy. When I finally emerged into the main room, the shadows had multiplied, gathering at corners, stretching across the floor like black rivers. My own footsteps left marks I hadn't made, deep scratches, jagged lines tracing the path I had run, and at the end of each trail, faintly etched into the wooden floor, were symbols I didn't understand, yet instinctively recognized as warnings. I began avoiding the basement altogether, but I could still feel its pull, a cold, irresistible tug that whispered at the edges of my thoughts. Every time I passed the floorboards above it, I felt it shiver under my feet, as if something were moving beneath, waiting. Nights became unbearable. The whispers returned, urgent and pleading, circling around me like smoke. I could feel invisible fingers brushing my arms, crawling along my spine, teasing, threatening. The figure from before appeared often now, tall and thin, its head tilting impossibly, watching me from shadows that should not exist. I never saw its eyes clearly, but I knew they were fixed on me, burning into my mind. One night I dared to peek into the hidden doors again. The air beyond was colder than ice, thick and choking. Shadows wriggled like living snakes, curling around shapes I could barely comprehend. I felt drawn forward, unable to resist, but a voice in my head screamed at me to stop. It wasn't human, and yet it sounded like my own, whispering, warning, mocking me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and the shadows recoiled, as if disappointed I hadn't advanced. When I turned to leave, I noticed the scratches on the floor had returned. They were no longer simple lines, they formed patterns, twisting into letters and words I could just barely make out in the dim light. My blood ran cold as I read them. You cannot leave. I backed into the corner, staring at the dark hallway that had formed where my kitchen wall had once been. I felt the apartment's breath on my neck, a cold, wet pressure that seemed to seep into my very bones. I realized then that the basement, the hidden doors, the moving shadows, they were all part of the same design. The apartment didn't just trap people. It shaped them, studied them, drew them in, waiting for their fear to make them its own. And then I noticed something else. In the corner, faintly glowing, scratched into the floorboards near my bed, were words that hadn't been there before. Stay. They pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, that the apartment would never let me go. The apartment didn't just trap me anymore, it followed me everywhere. Even when I stepped outside, the world felt wrong. Streets were empty, buildings looked unfamiliar, and the air hung heavy, thick with silence that pressed against my ears. Every turn I took brought me back to the apartment's front door, though I had no memory of retracing my steps. The city itself had become an extension of the apartment, a labyrinth designed to keep me contained, to make escape impossible. I began to see the shadows outside as well, thin shapes that lingered at the edges of my vision, stretching across the sidewalks, crawling along walls. I stopped trusting anyone or anything beyond my apartment's threshold. Sometimes, I thought I saw faces behind the glass of empty shops, pale, pressed flat against the windows, staring with the same hollow eyes I had seen in the basement. My chest tightened at the thought, and I hurried back inside, as if safety could be found within these walls, though I knew it could not. Inside, the apartment had changed again. Rooms had shifted while I was away. Hallways twisted, doors appeared and vanished. The mirrors reflected things I couldn't comprehend, my own body moving in ways I wasn't controlling, reaching toward places I had no intention of going. I began avoiding mirrors entirely, covering them with sheets. But the reflection of myself or something pretending to be me still haunted the corners of my vision. Sometimes I could feel it just behind me, breathing my air, moving with me, mimicking my steps. The whispers never stopped. They circled me constantly now, louder and sharper, forming words that scratched at my sanity. I could feel the apartment learning me, understanding my fears, exploiting them. Every sound, the hum of the radiator, the creak of the floorboards, even my own heartbeat felt amplified, warning me, mocking me. I had stopped sleeping completely. My eyes were raw, my body exhausted, but the apartment demanded my awareness, demanded my terror. One night, as I moved through the rooms, I saw them again, the figures. They weren't just shadows anymore. Thin, hunched shapes pressed against the windows, lurking just out of reach, their heads tilting at unnatural angles. They had faces now, distorted and pale, twisted in endless fear, silent mouths moving as though screaming without sound. I wanted to turn away, to close my eyes, but something compelled me to stare. My own reflection in the glass mirrored them. And then I realized, with a sudden sickening clarity, that I had become one of them all would soon. I tried to leave, desperate for the streets, for freedom, for air that wasn't heavy with whispers. I ran through the hallways, following doors that I hoped led to exits. But each one twisted into another, looping back, folding in on itself. The apartment had become a maze, a trap I could not navigate. I felt invisible hands brushing my shoulders, tugging me back, pulling me toward corners I didn't dare enter, toward rooms I hadn't noticed before. The scratches on the floor had returned, longer now, deeper, etched in jagged lines that formed words I could barely read in the dim light. Stay. They glowed faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm as my heartbeat, reminding me that I had no choice, no control, no escape. Each night the word burned brighter, louder, until it felt like it was seared into my very bones. I began to notice the walls themselves were watching me. Small cracks and chips shifted subtly when I wasn't looking, forming patterns that seemed almost like eyes. I would glance away, and when I looked back, the patterns had changed, tracking my movements. The apartment was patient, but it had memory, intelligence, and something worse, malice. It had planned this long before I arrived. I was not a tenant. I was prey. And then, one night, I understood the final horror. In the corner of the living room, where shadows pooled darkest, the tall figure appeared again, tilting its head impossibly. Its hand reached toward me, slow, deliberate, and I realized that this was not a single entity, it was all of them. Every shadow, every figure, every distorted reflection, converging. They were the apartment. They had always been the apartment, and my name, scratched faintly into the floor near the entrance, glowed among hundreds of others. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. My body felt heavy, unresponsive, as though the apartment itself was merging with me, claiming me before I could resist. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and saw the walls pulse, ripple like liquid, shadows writhing and pressing in closer. My eyes fell to the floor, and I saw the message carved deep, glowing faintly as if alive. Stay forever. I backed into a corner, too terrified to move. The city outside didn't matter anymore. The apartment didn't need doors. The walls didn't need windows. It had me fully, utterly. And the last thought I had before collapsing into cold, exhausted terror was that no one could ever leave this place. And if they thought they could, the apartment would wait patiently, silently, to claim them too. I thought I was alone, truly alone, but I was never alone. The apartment had made that painfully clear. Each night, the whispers returned louder, more urgent, circling around me like smoke, curling through the rooms and twisting into my mind. They formed words, commands, warnings, pleadings, but always one word dominated, repeating over and over, stay. I tried leaving one last time. I gathered my keys, my bag, every scrap of courage I had left, and ran toward the front door. The hallway stretched unnaturally before me, folding and twisting in impossible ways. My pulse raced. The city beyond the door should have been salvation. But when I stepped outside, nothing looked familiar. Streets stretched endlessly. Buildings loomed impossibly high, their windows black and empty. Every turn I took brought me back inexorably to the apartment's front door. I pounded on it, desperate, shaking, but it didn't budge. The key in my pocket burned my fingers, searing me with a warning I could not ignore. Inside the apartment was different again. Shadows pooled thicker than ever, crawling along the walls like living things. The whispers had intensified, forming urgent chants calling my name, echoing in the corners, slithering under the floorboards. The hidden doors had multiplied, appearing in every room, their edges rippling like water. Shapes shifted just beyond vision, hunched figures moving with impossible angles, heads twisting unnaturally. They were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stumbled into the living room, breathless, heart pounding so violently I thought it might burst. The scratches on the floor had returned, glowing faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat in rhythm with mine. The words formed lines I could barely read in the dim light. You belong here. I wanted to tear them away, to scrub the floor, to erase them, but I knew it was pointless. The apartment didn't just mark you, it owned you. The figures appeared then, hundreds of them, pressing silently against the windows, stretching impossibly thin, faces pressed flat, mouths open in eternal screams. I wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. I could feel the apartment merging with me, stretching into my mind, shaping my thoughts, controlling my actions. My reflection in the mirror no longer showed me, it showed one of them. My own eyes, wide with terror, staring back from a face twisted, pale, empty. I understood then that I had never been truly alive here. The apartment didn't just trap tenants, it fed on them, transformed them, claimed them until there was nothing left of the person they once were. Each shadow, each whisper, each figure was a memory of someone else, someone who had tried to leave, someone who had failed, and now I was joining them. My name etched faintly into the floor alongside hundreds of others, glowing like a warning, a promise, a curse. I tried to fight, to run, to resist, but my body moved on its own, taking me toward the corner where the shadows pooled darkest. I could feel them pressing against my skin, merging with me, filling me with the same hollow, infinite fear I had seen on every face in the windows. The apartment had won. I was becoming one of them, one of the watchers, one of the whispers. Then, for a brief, terrifying instant, I saw the truth. The apartment didn't just exist here. It existed everywhere. It had patience, it had reach, and it had memory. Every apartment, every building, every hidden corner of the city could be like this one, and it waited always for the next tenant, the next wanderer, the next person who thought they could escape. I tried to scream again, but no sound came. The shadows pressed closer, the whispers surrounded me, and my body became unresponsive, absorbed into the darkness. I felt my mind splitting, stretching, blending into the apartment's consciousness. I realized I was no longer me, but something else entirely, something patient, something eternal. And yet, even as I felt myself becoming part of it, a small, desperate thought flickered in the back of my mind. Someone might read this, someone might hear the warning, perhaps. Somewhere, in some apartment like this, a new tenant could escape, perhaps. But deep down, I knew the truth. The apartment doesn't let anyone go. Once it claims you, you stay, you watch, you wait. You whisper. The next person who opens that door will hear your voice, urging them, pleading, warning, until they understand the only truth that matters. Stay, and if you ever find an apartment with shadows moving behind the windows, whispers that brush against your ears, or a feeling of being watched in every corner, do not enter. Whatever is inside is patient. It is hungry, and it will always win. Because once you cross the threshold, you do not just move in, you stay.